The storm had passed, but the land had not forgotten. Mud clung to everything, boots, uniforms, even the air. When the rescue teams reached the old bridge that morning, they thought they were looking at another washed-out road. But then the K9 stopped. He froze near the railing, ears stiff, breath visible in the cold air. His handler called out, thinking he had picked up the scent of debris, but the dog did not move. He leaned forward, staring into the churning water below, his chest trembling with a deep, uneasy growl. Something was down there, something no one had noticed, and what they would soon find beneath that broken bridge would silence the entire crew. Here is the full story, but before we jump in, one click can change everything for you here. Hit like, subscribe, and let us see how deep this story really goes. The morning after the storm, the rescue unit moved in slow, tired patterns. Their trucks were streaked with dried mud and the air smelled of wet earth and diesel. Officer Daniels led his K9 partner Thor along the side of the damaged bridge, a stretch of concrete barely holding against the current. Thor's paws left faint prints on the wet surface. His movements were steady, deliberate, but his ears kept twitching toward the far edge. The sound of the river below was deafening, a heavy, endless roar that swallowed every other sound. The men were focused on inspecting the cracks along the structure, believing the worst danger had already passed. But Thor's sudden stillness cut through everything. He stopped at the far railing and began to growl. Not the playful, low warning he sometimes gave during training. This was deeper, primal. Daniels looked over the side. Nothing but water churning beneath them, carrying branches and bits of wreckage downstream. Still, Thor would not move. His tail stiffened. He lowered his body and began to bark again, this time faster, louder. The nearby officers turned, watching as Daniels tried to calm him. Then came the first micro-anomaly, a glint beneath the surface. It flickered between the waves just for a second, then vanished again. At first, Daniels thought it was a piece of metal, but something about it looked too clean, too deliberate. A pattern was forming. 3 barks, pause. 2 barks, pause. He had done this before during search drills for missing persons. Daniels felt his pulse quicken. He reached for his radio, signaling for a light scan on the lower embankment. Within minutes, a pair of rescue workers descended the muddy slope, their boots sliding through the soaked ground. The beam of a flashlight swept across the flooded edge, then stopped. Something pale was lodged between 2 broken slabs of concrete. Not wood, not fabric, something smooth and unmistakably human. The flood had carried more than water. Above them, Thor let out one last bark that echoed across the valley, sharp and mournful, as if he already knew what the river had taken. By the time the recovery team returned, the sky had shifted from gray to the bruised blue of late evening. The bridge had turned into a command post, tarps fluttered, radios crackled, and the rain refused to stop. Thor stayed by the railing, motionless, his fur slick with water. His handler, Officer Daniels, stood beside him, watching divers move toward the point where the flashlight had caught the shape earlier. The river fought back with every inch. Debris floated like forgotten memories, passing silently beneath the bridge. Every second felt stretched thin. Then the first diver surfaced, shaking his head. Nothing yet. Another went down, scanning deeper beneath the fractured supports. Thor began to grow restless again. He turned sharply toward the opposite side of the bridge and let out a short, deep bark. Something in his tone made Daniel's stomach twist. It was not just detection anymore. It was insistence. Thor pulled hard at his leash, straining toward a section of collapsed railing. Daniels followed the pull and stepped closer. The metal beams were bent inward, their edges rusted and torn. Beneath them, mud had gathered in thick layers, forming an unnatural mound. When one of the floodlights shifted direction, its beam caught something embedded halfway in that mound, a small reflective tag. It was a part of a vehicle license plate. But not just any vehicle. The tag matched a report from the previous night. A missing family's car, swept away during the storm, last seen crossing this same bridge before it collapsed. The rescue team grew quiet. No one spoke, but the air itself seemed to tighten. Thor stood over the edge, eyes fixed on the spot as if waiting for someone to surface. Daniels gave the signal to widen the search area. Divers shifted downstream, where the current bent sharply toward a bank of fallen trees. It was there, tangled in roots and debris, that they finally saw it. The silhouette of a vehicle submerged beneath the current, only the faint outline visible through the floodwater, a dark SUV. Its front bumper was crushed, windows shattered. The current had hidden it perfectly under layers of mud and branches. Thor whined softly, pacing back and forth, his movements almost human. He knew what it meant before anyone spoke. When the first door was pried open, the light caught something that should not have been there. A child's car seat, still strapped, but empty. No trace of a body. The rescuers froze. They had expected tragedy. What they found was worse, absence. Daniels looked down, trying to piece the fragments together. A car swept away, a child missing, a dog that refused to stop signaling at the wrong side of the bridge. Was Thor leading them to another piece of the same story, or something entirely different? The flood had buried its secrets deep, but Thor was not done. He turned suddenly, ears pricking toward the direction of the riverbank, the same path where the water twisted back into the forest. He growled, low and steady, then began to walk. Not toward the wreck, not toward the divers, but inland. Something in that forest had caught his scent. Something connected to what the flood had carried away. Daniels hesitated for only a second before following. The woods beyond the river were silent except for the faint hum of insects. Mud squelched beneath every step. Fallen branches cracked underfoot. Thor moved ahead, his nose close to the ground, following an invisible trail that twisted between trees blackened by rain. Thor stopped again, head raised, nostrils flaring. Then came a single sharp bark, the kind that carried both discovery and warning. Daniel scanned the area. Ahead, the forest opened into a small clearing where the floodwaters had carved a shallow pool. In the center of it stood a half-submerged shed, its tin roof caved inward, walls leaning under the weight of mud and branches. It looked abandoned, but Thor's reaction said otherwise. He growled low, circling the edge of the pool, every muscle tense. As Daniels moved closer, his light reflected off something caught on the shed's corner, a torn piece of cloth. It was bright pink, soaked and clinging to the wood, a child's jacket. The realization hit like a flood surge. The missing car seat, the empty strap, the sudden shift in Thor's scent trail, they were all leading here. Thor began to dig near the base of the shed. Each motion was frantic, urgent, filled with a purpose Daniels could not yet see. Mud flew behind him as water sloshed against his legs. Within moments, his paws hit something solid. A metallic sound rang out, not wood, not stone, metal. Daniels knelt and brushed away the surface. What emerged was a steel hatch, half hidden beneath earth and branches, sealed tight. It made no sense. Who would bury something like this here, in the middle of a forest floodplain? Daniels called for backup, but before help could arrive, Thor's growl deepened again. This time it was directed not downward, but behind them. The forest was no longer silent. Leaves rustled, twigs snapped. Daniels turned just as a flashlight beam flickered through the trees. Not from his team, a faint moving light weaving between the trunks heading away from the shed. Someone else was here. Someone watching. Thor bolted. He lunged forward through the trees, barking furiously, his body a blur of motion against the dark. Daniels ran after him, heart pounding, mud flying underfoot. For several seconds, the chase was pure chaos. Light, movement, sound. Then the light ahead vanished. When Daniels reached the spot where it disappeared, he found only footprints, deep, hurried, pressed into the mud. Next to them, half buried beneath leaves, was a soaked photograph. He picked it up carefully. It showed a man, a woman, and a small child standing beside the same SUV now submerged beneath the bridge. It was not a missing person photo. It was evidence. The man in the image matched a name from Daniels' flood report list. someone who had worked on the construction project for that very bridge. The storm had not just washed away a family. It had uncovered something meant to stay hidden. Thor returned from the dark, panting, his fur matted with rain. He looked at Daniels, then back toward the hatch. Whatever this was, it had not ended with the flood. It had started there. What they would uncover inside would turn the entire rescue into a criminal investigation. By the time the backup team arrived, the forest looked like another world, half drowned, half buried in silence. The floodlight beams carved pale lines through the mist as Daniel stood beside the hatch Thor had uncovered. Mud caked the edges. Branches pressed against it like hands trying to hold it down. It took 3 officers to pry it open. The metal shrieked, echoing across the flooded woods. Inside, darkness swallowed the light at first, then slowly revealed what lay below. A narrow concrete tunnel barely large enough for one person to crawl through. Water dripped from the ceiling, rippling down the walls. Thor's ears perked immediately. He sniffed the air once, then descended before anyone could stop him. The tunnel led no more than 30 feet before opening into a hidden chamber. There, under a collapsed beam, lay a man, lifeless, his arm outstretched toward a metal case. The light caught his face, confirming what Daniels already suspected. It was the same man from the photograph. But the discovery went beyond tragedy. Inside the case were detailed bridge schematics, inspection reports, and hand-signed approvals, all falsified. He had been part of the crew that built the structure. The flood had not just destroyed it, it had exposed a cover-up. Bribes, faulty reinforcements, untested materials, all buried under layers of paperwork and mud. The missing family had been driving across that bridge when it collapsed, and the man now lying beneath it had engineered their fate. Thor whined softly, pressing his nose against the man's sleeve. Then his attention shifted again to a faint sound behind a pile of debris. Daniels followed his gaze and froze. A weak cry echoed through the tunnel, faint, fragile, but real. When the rescuers lifted the debris, they found a child, the same child from the photo, bruised, cold, but breathing. The missing piece of the story was alive. Thor backed away as medics rushed in, his eyes wide, his body trembling as if the tension of the last hours had finally broken. He had not only solved the mystery, he had saved what was left of it. By sunrise, the story had reached every news channel. A bridge collapse linked to corruption, a survivor found beneath the wreckage, and a K-9 who refused to stop searching when everyone else believed it was over. Days later, under a clear sky, Thor stood beside his handler in front of the police headquarters. Officers lined the courtyard as the chief stepped forward, holding a small blue ribbon. The metal gleamed in the morning light as it was placed around Thor's neck. His tail moved once, slow and deliberate, as if he understood what the silence around him meant. The flood had buried the truth, but a dog's instinct had uncovered what human eyes had missed. Every life saved, every secret exposed, had started with one bark beside a broken bridge. And as the city rebuilt what the storm had taken, Thor's story became a quiet legend, one of courage, persistence, and the bond that never breaks between a handler and his dog. Sometimes it takes more than courage to uncover the truth. It takes a heart that refuses to give up. Thor's story reminds us that even in the darkest places, loyalty can light the way home. If stories like this move you, stay with us. The next case runs deeper than anyone expects.